Alrighty, good morning. Ryan, you should see an invite. We had some technical difficulties on the other side of the pond, apparently. And so I just sent him an invite to co-host, our leader, our fearless leader. There he is. All right. You're fine. You kick it right
Sorry,
off.
sorry, so-
Let's just
sorry for
pretend.
sorry for the very late start. As usual, this is the Grey Market Blast for myself and the glamorous Angie Setzer. It is Wednesday, the 16th of July. Again, no idea how we got here. You join me listening, well, with you guys listening to Angie give us a rapid roundup of latest pricing, closed market moving news in agricultural markets. But before she does, I would say, so I don't get a spanking, but I think because I'm so late, I'm going to get one anyway. I'll get the legals out of the way. So nothing discussed on the Spaces session constitute trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, myself, Ryan Paisley, or indeed the glamorous and the very patient Angie Setzer.
I am the most patient. Anyone that knows me in real life
You
will
need
be
to be
like,
working
no,
with
she
me.
is not. She is not at all. But I was this time. It gave me more time to put together my notes, of which there are plenty. So yeah, happy the hell Wednesday. I have the wrong date written on the top of my notes. I have Tuesday, July 15th. I must have just forgot to scratch it out. Anyway, it's Wednesday. And it hit me today that we are 1 month away from school starting again. And yeah, I'm not a fan of this summer flying by, at all. So I'm going to try not to think about it. But anyway, welcome again. Happy hump day to those of you who observe, big things that we're paying attention to this morning in the grain market. And we are seeing the market higher this morning. If you didn't look, corn's up about 5 currently. Beans are up about 10. And I am ready to get hurt again. So here I am.
Nice and
Optimistic as
positive.
all hell.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Today's going to be a good day in my mind. So here we go. Let's see what happens. Wheat is a little bit lower, but we won't talk about that at this point. Big focuses obviously are trade deals. A lot of talk yesterday about the Indonesia deal. They agreed to buy a larger chunk of U.S. energy, like some jets, obviously ag products, things like that. Indonesia is a big importer of wheat and soybeans mostly, from what I did in a quick little Ask Grok run through here ahead of the day today. But it looks like on their side of the trade deal, you're seeing their tariff rate go down to 19% from a threatened rate of 32%. They obviously promised to increase their purchases. The U.S. has no tariffs on what they send over to Indonesia. And then, of course, we have some tariffs on what Indonesia sends to us. Really it's kind of, like the Vietnam trade deal, which President Trump said, yeah, we got a trade deal with Vietnam. No, I don't think the details are necessary. And so that's always a great sign. But in any event, that's really what we're looking at this point is you are going to see, an uptick potentially or likely with a lot of these countries here, an uptick in ag products, an uptick in energy products, an uptick in security or jets or whatever, because that's basically what the U.S. is able to send out. And we're going to get probably 2 or 3 more deals is what the administration is saying. And then really from there, everyone's just basically going to have to figure it out. I've seen a couple different, and you can kind of chime in on this, Ryan, sort of opinion, pieces or maybe just kind of thought exercises or whatever where people are like, whoa, like, 19%. If you'd have told people 7 months ago that 19% would be considered an okay rate and that most countries would just be like, yeah, whatever, cool. We negotiated our asses off for this. They'd say you were a liar, but now it's basically like, well, at least it's not 50.
That's exactly it. I think this is why, the art of the deal, right?
Yeah.
Trump's scared, like as we, it's a term that's been massively overused. I'm doing air quotes again. I know no one can see me, but there you go. Escalate to de-escalate. I think this, the shock of the potential 50 or 40 or even 30 or whatever is there, so that if someone's walking away with 20%, they're taking this as a good deal, especially when they're looking, these nations now are looking to the EU that's been just lumped with a 30%, and they're
Yes.
going, well, bloody hell, if that's the EU getting 30, anything sub 30, that's a win for us.
Yes. Yeah. We're doing better than what they are, and then you've got Brazil with the 50, which you did see, Greer announced that he's opening up a 301 investigation. So basically, with the administration having some of these rulings or decisions in the court that kind of, were like, whoa, that's overstepping, and, having some questions over what they can or cannot do with tariffs, you're seeing them kind of with these 301s. This is a national security sort of thing or whatever. It basically fits into what they have to follow in order to be able to have the president just kind of unilaterally apply these tariffs. But you have seen things that Brazil has pulled with ethanol and some of these other industries, that have been protectionist in nature. So that kind of shows us that, that deal is probably going to remain, something that we're going to have to pay attention to. We are doing that, podcast, webinar, whatever the hell it is, here in another half hour or so, where I'll be talking to Eduardo about what is going on, in Brazil, what farmers are doing when it comes to grain movement. Obviously we've seen their currency weaken here recently with some of this tariff talk. It's fallen off from, where you've seen it. Isn't that ridiculous? Like, I think some people thought it would just absolutely fall apart. It hasn't, but you obviously have that threat. As it's gotten weaker here since the start of the month, you've seen more in the way of farmer selling kind of come into play. Some of that, of course, is harvest is progressing, but just some of these things that we're going to be paying attention to here is how Trump kind of proceeds. And like you said, it does look like a deal will get made with the EU, though it'll be interesting to see what he pushes. I think the EU has this whole entire tie of security too. So like there's a whole different, angle on the negotiation of the trade deal. Like they have to work, somewhat. I feel like the EU feels that they have to work hand in hand with Trump because of the situation in Ukraine and all of that good stuff. So we'll be seeing, I think it's also important to point out, the Canada and Mexico deal. A lot of folks have been like, oh, these are our biggest trade partners. This is a really big deal. We've got to pay attention to it. The USMCA carve-outs are still there. Like, obviously it means about the same amount as what the paper it was written on, to a certain extent, because we did see this tomato agreement we backed out on and some of these other things. But, when it comes down to it, it really doesn't look like Canada or Mexico are going to do much to escalate. At least Mexico is not, escalate the situation. They're going to kind of work with the administration, do what they can. They don't have the freedom really at this point to either, to really shift significantly away from U.S. imports. Like, everyone kind of loves to, talk about that. Well, Mexico is going to stop buying our corn. Really, they can only basically bring in about 2 million metric ton out of like Brazil or something like that, because they just don't have the import infrastructure that's set up properly to do that right away. Now, in 10 years, could they tell us to go, fly a kite? Yeah, if we really push it. But I think we've got to pump the brakes on getting too awful shook up about that. Over to China, talking about trade. Yesterday we did see, the conversation come out where Lutnick said, yes, NVIDIA is going to be able to, and NVIDIA said it too, we can export those H2O chips to China now. So for those of you that don't live chronically connected to all things, China trade, all that crap or whatever, if you look back in time, there was a whole entire rigmarole, and you saw actually NVIDIA stock fall off, and there were some real concerns there where they had this huge deal put together. We've had chip, like, you have a lot of hoops, you have a lot of levels of chip technology and different things like that. Different levels of chip technology are allowed to be exported to different countries. There's certain restrictions and all of that jazz. China was able to take these kind of lower level chips, from NVIDIA. I think they're the H2O chips. They had a huge, sale, a huge kind of, trade put together. There was a lot of expectation that they were going to be shipped over. They had flown under the radar of restrictions from the Biden administration, some of these other things. Well, Trump came in and shut that down. They ended up getting, part of the restriction. Now, of course, it was all tied to China shutting down the flow of rare earth metals. There was the conversation, of course, that took place, amongst them. You have this trade deal come into play, and Lutnick said yesterday that NVIDIA being allowed to ship these H2O chips to China is part of that deal. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, to me, it means that the conversation that they are having, the relationship that they are pursuing, even if there are a lot of geopolitical and other angles that are kind of concerning, when it comes to trade and working together from an economic cooperation standpoint, they're at least following through on their initial agreement. Now, what does that mean going forward? I have no freaking clue. But you also did see yesterday more in the way of rumors about China inquiring freight out of the Gulf, freight out of the PNW. There's talk that there was some China business done. We did see a sale announced this morning of 100 and some odd thousand metric tons bought by unknown, which could be China. It also could be the EU or Egypt or anyone. But there is some talk that China's kind of starting to come back in and sniffing around when it comes to purchasing beans. Though there are some domestic things happening that are concerning. You've seen domestic corn prices fall off. Their auction interest has fallen off recently because everyone thinks prices are going to continue to get cheaper. And there's an overabundance of soybean meal said to be kind of burdening some of these crushers there. So a few things to be watching on the China side. Obviously, we have the trade conversation. I think Japan's coming back for chat number 12. Though I don't think anything's going to get done there until their election happens on Sunday and we see what they've got going on. Over on the other side of things, weather-wise, there is some talk. I feel hesitant to say this because we seem to struggle to forecast 10 days out, let alone 30. But there is some talk that we could see some hotter and drier conditions build in, here as we work our way into August, which could be problematic. There are also some issues popping up, with, potential pollination. And so some agronomists say that there aren't, this is going to be something that the plant will work itself out with, and then there's others that'll say, basically you're going to have to keep an eye on it, but we could look at, 10 to 20%, yield loss from potential based on some of these production issues. Now, I'm not saying that across the country. Don't get your panties in a wad. Just simply they're, more in the way of little issues starting to pop up. And really anyone that you talk to will tell you like, how much the country has to be firing on all cylinders to really kind of meet some of these exceptionally lofty yield expectations. We had people, as recently as a week ago kind of trying to say a 190 nationally was possible, if not a 195. Now, I'm not an agronomist. I'm not going to sit here and say unequivocally whatever, like I know this, that, or the other thing. But one of my customers is, I don't like to drop names, but he is one of the people that, has been awarded over the years for, corn yields. Like he holds, or did hold, I don't know, one of the records for one of the larger corn yields out of the state here and actually in the country. And we were talking the other day and he's like, just people aren't recognizing what it takes to really kind of produce a record crop like that on a wide scale. Like, yes, conditions are great, but conditions, weather only plays, X amount of role. You have all of these other things, disease, pest pressure, weather, the weather window during pollination, yada, yada, yada. So
you need a hell of a lot to go right rather than just
yes, that's my point. Thank you. You just made it in like 6 words instead of my 6,000. But so there's something that we got to pay attention to. And I think you might see that pendulum shift here pretty soon where we go from a 190, what if it's 190 to, okay, what if it's 178? What if it's a 179 and acres are down 1 million? Like, I think we need to start having some other conversations in this market. And I am starting to see more of the old guard, kind of shift a little bit of what they're saying. And the idea maybe that we don't wait until Labor Day this year, that seasonals might actually be pushed a little ahead. And so we'll be watching. We had a big important move here at the start of the week. Yesterday was kind of a follow through that it didn't necessarily fail, but it wasn't, what you'd want to see. Like I'd have rather seen us finish up 5 or whatever on the day. We finished up a penny. We are seeing some short covering, and you are seeing soybeans start to move higher. So we'll be paying attention to a lot of things. To me, I think the biggest thing, and then I'll shut up, but the biggest thing to really kind of recognize here, is that even with the board falling off, cash prices around the world for feed grains have firmed. And I have been doing this for a while, though I would not consider myself a smart man, by any means in that regard. But the biggest thing that I've always been told is that the board falls and cash continues to firm. That is not bearish. And so I think we just have to kind of keep our eye on it, make sure that we don't get too, cemented into the idea that it has to go to 0 at this point in time. Because there's a hell of a lot more that could go wrong in this crop than, meets the eye at this point. And so we'll be watching today really closely, see if we get any further trade talk, see if we see any more talk of, cash transactions being done on the bean side with China as we work into harvest. And then obviously we've got Russia, Ukraine, all of these other things going on. Overall though, we just opened, corn's back up 4, beans are up 12 currently. Wheat is laying there like a slug. It's its only defense. It's down 3.
Angie, thank you so much as always. And again, to you and our listeners, apologies for the complete technical foul up on my end. I'm not sure what's going on with
It's
space.
fashionably late, Ryan. Don't
Yeah,
apologize.
okay, but yeah, well, thank you. That makes me feel less guilty about it all. But as always, very much appreciate you and our listeners. And whatever you're doing today, stay safe, keep it tight, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Much love.
Have a good one, guys.